Good morning. Welcome everybody to this wonderful session about artificial intelligence applied to bacteriology, a session which is sponsored by COPAN. My name is Adrian Egli. I'm from the University of Zurich, and I'm co-chairing this together with Derek McFadden from the University of Ottawa. As you all know, technological advances are impacting our life at routine diagnostics really in a very, very fast speed. And an important technology is laboratory automation. And we have now 5 very interesting speakers, and they're leaders in their field, talking us and teaching us about how they use lab automation in combination with AI.
Great. And before we begin, we'll just a quick reminder of the format of the session. So we have the 5 speakers who will give their talks in sequence, and then at the end we'll bring up all the speakers to the stage, and that's where we'll have the Q&A, and we'll be able to have questions from the audience and online as well. So I'd like to first welcome Dr. Nolte. He's the head of microbiology at the Center for Laboratory Medicine in St. Gallen, Switzerland. Thank you very much for joining.
Okay. Thank you for your kind introduction. Thanks for inviting me to share my experience with you. I'm going to give a more generic introduction into the topic. And what you see here is nothing with bacteriology. It's even nothing with AI. It's the map of Copenhagen public transport. But this is the map of our AI in our laboratory, which is steering our WASP lab in AI and plate reading. So the main prerequisite for artificial intelligence-based plate reading is standardization. This is, at least to my point of view, the central issue. And with the modern streaking machines we have, we can get very, very standardized streakings, as you can see here, for blood cultures, positive with Enterococcus faecalis, and a second one which was streaked at another time from another patient from another bottle with faecium. And you see the standardization in streaking. Also, the incubation is standardized, and that works not only with blood culture but also with samples which are rich of microbes, as is shown here for a sample of a diabetic foot ulcer. So this is pretty well standardized, but what about reading and interpretation of the results? And this is where AI comes to the stage. Let's assume we have a plate image of a urine, like this one you can see here. And if we give this to different technicians, to different analysts with different degree of education, we might end up with different interpretation of the result, from putting everything as clinically relevant to flora. If we take the same image and put it to AI, we end up with just one result. And this is, in that case, it's flora. There's no workup required. And what is simply need to be done is that this result is being confirmed. So how does it work in the laboratory? And this is in principle a matter of what I call bio and informatics. The scheme how to rate culture plates is what we recall every day from our brains. We have a number of colonies. We rate the colony morphology. We rate the appearance of the colonies. We take into account patient characteristics and so on and so on. And when talking about AI, we simply transfer this to the computer or to the machine in order to benefit from machine learning. If we again have a urine plate like this with 3 different colony morphologies, we usually recall that algorithm from our brain, and we ask ourselves, do we need IDs? Do we need AST? Do we need to do subcultures first, or can we put it as a mixed flora or as non-significant growth? And the same is being done if we put the same image to the AI. The AI analyzes the growth on the culture plates with the same algorithm we have in mind, and puts the result in a predefined folder. This is what the Phenomatrix is doing. And the user, the reader, he or she can recall or just put up the result from the predefined folder. He can confirm what has been proposed by the AI as a pre-categorization, or he can decline if he thinks this is something different. And the decision to confirm or decline can be used in order to further train the AI. So this is how it works basically, and this is how it looks like if we get pre-categorization of flora, of plates which need ID and AST, or of plates which just need an AST in terms of E. coli pure culture. So the main thing here is that we get predefined categorization, a result which is proposed by the AI and which needs to be confirmed by the user. That's a pretty good difference to the way we are used to work in the laboratory right now. So why is this important? And I don't want to go deeply into this. These are results from a recent survey in the US, where the vacancy rate for microbiologists was defined to be 6.7% and even higher for the LIS people. And what is more worrisome is the anticipated retirement rate, which is even higher and which will strengthen the problem further. The problem is that about half of the laboratories reported to suffer from a lack of qualified applicants, and 4 out of 5 laboratories reported that they had at least one vacancy. There was another survey which was done in Down Under, and the results were about the same. And we all know, and I think we agree upon that, at least in many, if not all, or most European countries, the situation is about the same. So we have an ongoing problem with the shortage of staff, and AI and plate reading is one way to cope with this shortage, and it's able to free resources to focus on the really relevant result instead of working on irrelevant results. What does it mean for the laboratory? And this is a fundamental change. In a manual laboratory, we usually have workflows defined by the lab or by teams in order to get to process samples and get to a result. In the automated laboratory, it's the other way around. If we want to take the maximum benefit, then we need to adapt to the processes and workflows which are defined by the machines. Saying that, I thank you for your attention, and I hand over the word to Simon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to welcome Dr. Ambretti. Dr. Ambretti is Assistant Professor at the Department of Medical and Surgical Sciences at the University of Bologna, and also the Director of Bacteriology at St. Orsola Hospital in Bologna. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, I have to thank my chairman for the kind introduction. Sorry. And I have to thank Open for this kind invitation to this important session. I start my talk introducing my lab, the unit of clinical microbiology of St. Orsola University Hospital, which is a large tertiary university hospital with a high level of care intensity. But we do not work only for our hospital, because we are the one and only clinical microbiology lab for all Bologna metropolitan area. We receive samples taken from inpatients from 13 different hospitals, and also from all outpatients of Bologna area, counting for 1 million inhabitants. For this reason, our diagnostic workload is really huge. Talking about bacteriology diagnostic activity, as you can see, in 2022, we analyzed almost 160,000 blood culture bottles, almost 120,000 CRE surveillance rectal swabs, almost 100,000 urine cultures. Our experience with Copan automation started in 2009 when we introduced WASP for automation of streaking of liquid-based samples. Then in 2016, we implemented the WASP Lab, achieving automation of plates incubation and digital reading. If we stratify our bacteriology cultural samples based on the level of automation, we can say that currently we are using the traditional approach with manual streaking and with visual operator reading for a very little part of our routine samples. Less than 5% of samples represented in particular by biopsies, catheters, and other prosthetic materials. While for the vast majority of cultural samples, we are using different level of lab automation, ranging from automation of streaking and slide preparation to the automation, the high levels of automation represented by total automation, including interpretation of plate reading supported by Phenomatrix application. What is Phenomatrix? Is much more than an image analysis application. It's a real artificial intelligence application able to combine different types of data. For sure, imaging data, but also demographic and clinical data taking from LIS, and also interpretation customized rules in order to have presumptive results for agar plates. Segregating plates, as Dr. Nolte said before, into several different folders, usually one folder for negative samples and one or more folders for positive samples. This screen represents an example of real life of the impact of Phenomatrix on our diagnostic workflow of bacteriology lab. Phenomatrix is able to give a presumptive result for almost 80% of our samples, of our cultural samples. From 80 to 90% of plates incubated into WASP Lab incubators are receiving currently presumptive results evaluated by Phenomatrix application. We are currently using 4 different routinary protocols for CRE surveillance, GBS surveillance, yeast cultures, and URI cultures, globally evaluating daily 800 samples with Phenomatrix application. And I'm going to briefly describe all these protocols. We developed different protocols to achieve different diagnostic needs, starting from the simplest protocol, the GBS surveillance protocols, that is a simple image analysis algorithm able to recognize from a selective chromogenic medium colonies suspected as Streptococcus agalactiae based on color and size detection of the Phenomatrix protocol. The second protocol is represented by CRE surveillance protocol, probably the most impacting protocol on our workflow because of the high numbers, with a daily mean of 400 swabs and peaks of more than 800 swabs a day, and a positivity rate lower than 5%. In this case, the image analysis algorithm is able to detect Enterobacterales growth, discriminating between E. coli and other Enterobacterales species, in particular belonging to the group Klebsiella Enterobacter, Serratia Citrobacter. Moreover, we have a specific rule to detect and report Acinetobacter baumannii growth only for ICU patients. The third protocol is dedicated to yeast cultures. Also, in this case, the image analysis algorithm is able to detect all Candida species and to discriminate between Candida albicans, Candida tropicalis, and other Candida species. This is also a quantitative protocol because we develop different counting mode and different threshold values based on the type of samples. Finally, the last and most complex protocol we develop is dedicated to urine cultures. In this case, the image analysis algorithm is able to discriminate and to recognize different types of colonies, but the final result is based on different data, including total colonies counting, the number of different type of isolates, and we have a specific rule in order to report GBS for women in childbearing age. All the protocols were implemented after a strict, careful validation process assessing the accuracy of these protocols. As you can see, the overall agreement was either higher than 96%, and in particular for all surveillance protocol, we have a very high level of sensitivity and of negative predictive values, as the risk of false negatives is near to zero. In conclusion, as I have shown in my talk, currently almost 80% of our bacteriology samples are routinely evaluated by AI protocols of phenometrics. But our journey to automation in bacteriology is not yet over. We are working on the improvement of existing protocols, and we are also working on the development of new protocols, including multiple place samples. Moreover, I would like to implement automated rapid AST for positive blood cultures. In my opinion, automation means mainly greater standardization, traceability, and efficiency. Moreover, as Dr. Nolt said before, in this moment, another great value is represented by the time we can save by using automation. We need time to dedicate to other activities that really requires human hands, human eyes, and human brains. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. So we will have, as mentioned, the questions at the end. So now it's a real pleasure to introduce Dr. Anthony Croxato. He is the director of the microbiology department of the foundation ADMET in La Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland. He received his PhD in 2006 at the University of Lausanne and specialized in medical microbiology at the CHUV, so the University Hospital of Lausanne, and was there working for 7 years and published quite a bit on lab automation. And since 2001, he's at ADMET Foundation. Anthony, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for this kind presentation. So, as you may know, AI needs performant robotics to perform the physical task in the lab. And one of the tools that is proposed today are automatic colony picking systems that can prepare plates for broker identification and AST. So first, I would like to thank Copen for inviting me to this session, because I'm not at all a Copen system user, so I think I'm a very naive observer for this multi-center evaluation, and I was extremely pleased to do it. So I would like to thank as well all the labs and the lab manager who accepted to be involved in this evaluation and for answering all the questions I have addressed to them and all the data they provided to me, files and communicated data, publication, posters, and so on. So we can see that these labs, 7 labs that have been involved in this evaluation are for 5 different countries, European countries. So the methodology I've used to make this evaluation was to send a questionnaire to these labs addressing many aspects such as lab mapping, staff, volumes, and as well the objective and expectations they were having by acquiring the Colibri, trying to better understand the workflow in terms of level of automation, AD/AST systems they were having, and the performance data they obtained during the evaluation validation of the Colibri in the different labs. And of course, the results they got in terms of impact of Colibri on the lab organization, change management, quality, productivity, and traceability. So just a few overview of these labs. You can see that the volumes they are processing per year is very different, from around 100,000 for Singal in Switzerland to more than 1 million for Labo Sud in France. And one index of productivity is usually that we can measure, so there is a number of specimens per lab technician, and you can see that for Labo Sud and for Serba Alliance, the number of specimens per technician is extremely high. And this is achieved with different combination of WASP labs in terms of the systems, the number of lines. You can see Labo Sud, which has a very high number of specimens, has 2 lines. And it is as well the only lab that has 2 colibris. The other labs, they only have 1 colibri, which apparently is sufficient to process all the specimens they are having. I indicated here as well that, of course, the connection to the ILS is always an issue, and you can see that most of the labs have managed to connect properly their system with the different type of LIS, and that they are using what was recently described, Phenomatrix for almost all the lab, and 2 labs are already using Phenomatrix tag, which I think is a very useful tool for the use of such system as a Colibri. So the Colibri is connected to different systems for identification, and AST is preparing target plate for Malditoff identification for the Malditoff of Brucker, most of the lab, and for the BioMérieux system in the Duberland Medical Center. Regarding preparation of microbial suspension for AST, you can see that these labs have very various AST systems using either the Radiant from Copen, Vitek from BioMérieux, Microscan, Beckman Coulter, and Phoenix from Beckman Dickinson, which is pretty interesting because we can really have a look at the performance of the Colibri to prepare bacterial suspension and look at the results. One of my main questions was, what were the main objective and expectation of this lab throughout the questionnaire? And I listed several items that you can read here on the left, and some labs had great expectations, some a little bit less, but at least you could see that most of them, they had 4 main expectations: reduce hands-on time, standardization, improved traceability, and increased productivity. The Colibri Malditoff preparation workflow, I will not go into detail. If you're, of course, interested in the Colibri, you're welcome to the Copen booth. They will have the time to describe in detail how it works. But basically, for target plate preparation, the Colibri can pick up colonies, spot the target on the Maldi plate, add formic acid, this is not compulsory, and then add the matrix. The colonies can be manually selected by the operator or automatically through Phenomatrix tag, which I think is a very interesting tool to perform that, because selecting 20 colonies manually is a loss of time. So that's the evaluation that did these different labs. 3 labs, basically, they compared Colibri preparation versus manual preparation, and the reference method was the manual preparation. The University Geneva HUG, they did a different approach. They had a collection strain, so known strains, identified strain, and they compared the performance of the Colibri and manual preparation to this known strain collection. And maybe the more realistic evaluation was when they have the Colibri in production, just looking at the rate of Brusque score above 2. That's the result they got for identification. And you can see that most of the lab for gram-negative bugs, they got identification rate with a Brucker score above 2, above 90%, sorry. Gram-positive between 80 and 90% for most of them. Yeast, pretty good identification score as well. Except one lab, Labo Sud, which had a little reduced performance, but pay attention that for this evaluation, formic acid was used with the manual preparation, but not with the Colibri, which of course can introduce a bias in the performance they obtain. Otherwise, maybe the more realistic performance for me is the one, as I mentioned, from HUG, just looking at Bruker scores above 2 in routine diagnostic, and you can see that for gram-negative and gram-positive, they almost reach 90%, a rate of 90% identification scores above 2, and around 60% for yeast. So overall, the results are pretty similar of what we can obtain when we prepare the plates manually. What is interesting with robotization is, of course, what we call standardization and accuracy. So we can look at repeatability and reproducibility. And I thank the lab UZ Brussels who provided me with detailed information about what they did. And you can see that both for repeatability and reproducibility, the results are pretty similar between the Colibri and manual preparation. And for the rate of identification scores above 2, the results are very similar. Maybe what should be mentioned is MALDI-TOF identification is very robust. Basically, you can get identification at the species level with only 5 to 10 peaks. So basically, looking just at scores for me is not enough to really evaluate the quality of the preparation, and maybe additional work has to be performed by extracting raw data from the MALDI-TOF systems to really appreciate if there is a difference of quality in the preparation between the Colibri and manual preparation. In Geneva, they did a repeatability evaluation, and you can see that there are no major differences between the Colibri and manual, but at least what you can see is that the Colibri is never tired like technician number 2, who had a weak day, and basically with scores that were sometimes below 2, usually with the Colibri. If you do repeatability and reproducibility, you obtain scores above 2, so species identification. Now moving to the AST bacterial suspension preparation by the Colibri. So the Colibri can pick colonies, prepare bacterial suspension, and obtain, or the target is having a McFarlane between 0.45 to 0.55. And it can be done by picking colonies, adding more colonies, diluting if necessary. And Koppen recommendation are 4 colonies for gram-negative, 6 colonies for gram-positive to achieve the right McFarlane solution. What the different labs did as an evaluation was quite different from each other. At least the University Hospital of Geneva, they do not did a direct comparison of Colibri and manual with an AST system. They compared Colibri Radiant to manual Vitek, whereas all the other labs, they compare Colibri and manual bacterial suspension preparation on different AST systems. And of course, just to remind you, if you want to follow the ISO 20736 or the guidance for industry and FDA, what is expected for a system to be minimal performance to be integrated in the lab is essential agreement and category agreement equal or superior or 90%, and very major discrepancies and major discrepancies below 3%. Knowing that, I will show you the results they got. So if we take the first evaluation of the Hospital of Geneva, you could see that for the different type of microorganisms, the category agreement were excellent, almost 99% at least for all type of microorganisms. And the performance of the Colibri plus Radiant was excellent with very few, very major and major discrepancies, whereas manual and Vitek, especially for very major discrepancies, the number were a little bit higher from 5 to 10%. Now, if we take the other evaluation, where a real comparison between Colibri preparation and manual preparation with the same AST system was done, you can appreciate as well that for the 4 labs, Labo Sud, Guardia, Singal, and Bruxelles, The essential agreement was excellent as well. Almost all of them got above 97% essential agreement, as well for category agreements. And most of them got very major discrepancies below 3%, except maybe in a single with a phoenix, especially for non-fermentative gram-negative bacilli. But talking with Dr. Nolte, there was only one dilution difference with the phoenix to the UCAST breakpoints cutoff, which for me, of course, biologically happens. So maybe Singal needs to do a little bit more extensive evaluation with more bugs to observe what's going on. Finally, I asked different labs some information for change management, maintenance, and improvement. So change management, the question was simple. How was it accepted by the library staff? You can see that for 6 out of 7 labs, extremely good. And for one lab, they had maybe some people that were more resistant to changement, but it went pretty well as well. How long did it take to train the staff? 3 to 5 days per technician. It shows that the system is apparently easy to use because this is pretty short time for training a staff with such systems. Maintenance is always a question I like to ask because sometimes we undervalue the time needed to do the maintenance on automation systems. But basically, for system, it's very similar: daily, weekly, monthly, little on time for maintenance, which is what we would like to expect. Technical failures, we always have technical failures. I just let you read the ones that they reported, but you can see that 3 labs out of 7 had nothing to declare regarding that. I have no idea about the numbers, the downtimes, etc. So the things that should be investigated to have a better idea on if the system is robust or not. And the improvement for one lab, higher throughput maybe, stackers better adapted to different plate types. This is always a small issue with the system, but most of the labs, 6 out of 7, had nothing to ask for improvement, which basically shows that the Colibri is really reaching the expectations. When I come back to the first question I asked at the end, if the laboratories achieved what they were expecting, you can see on this list that for most of the items, yes, they did, or they are still under evaluation. For some items, the answer was no. For instance, in Singal, they are only using the Colibri for gram-negative, so they could not really measure reduced staff needs because they are not processing all the type of bugs. And some labs, for instance, improved traceability. They could not demonstrate an improvement because they already had a very good traceability system. And for staff reduction, Zuiderland and Laval, they mentioned that they could reduce the staff by 2 for the activities on ID and AST. When I mean reduce staff, what do they did? They allowed them to reallocate the staff to other activities, maybe with more added value, such as image reading, pre-analytic, lab management, and other stuff. They as well showed that you have a real increase in productivity if you can reduce the staff for this activity. And for some of them, they do not renew people that retired. And these are my conclusions. So the performance from what I've been able to observe of the Colibri is at least as good as the friend methods. It allows improvement of standardization of laboratory processes, reduction in working time for ID and AST, which mean to some point staff reduction and increased productivity. The system seems to be robust and quick to learn and facilitate the workflow on lab processes. Maybe future perspective or investigation that should be done. Higher throughput may be required for some lab with very large volume. Reduction of time to result that not yet been demonstrated. And the technical quality assessment of the Colibri for me remains to be done really to assess the Colibri alone and not linked to AST or other ID system. And very likely, full potential of the WAS lab and Colibri may be achieved with artificial intelligence and systems such as the phenometric stack. By that, I'm done, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anthony. So it's a pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Professor Raphael Canton. He's head of the microbiology department at the University Hospital Ramon y Cajal in Madrid. He's currently the clinical data coordinator of UCAST and in the advisory committee of the JIP AMR program, and he's the past president of the Spanish Society of Infectious Diseases and Clinical Microbiology and of UCAST. Thank you very much for coming.
So thank you very much for the presentation, and also I would like to thank to Copan to choose the title of the presentation. And when they proposed me to participate in this symposium, they proposed me this question that you can read here. Does really rapid antimicrobial susceptibility testing really make sense? And obviously, doing this question to me, I will say yes, yes. And with this, I can end my presentation. But just trying to think about that, I remember this article that I published with Elia Gomez Garcia de la Pedrosa from my laboratory. That was a publication on Malditov, just after, let's say, 8-10 years of the introduction in our laboratory, just to think what the clinician expects for us. And we built this curve with some reference that they can find in the publication, that they have a lot of interest when the patient are sampling. Of course, they send a request for a study in the laboratory, and they have a very high interest in the results that we have. And then the interest decreases over the time. If the patients go well, they forget about that. Probably they will see when the patient is discharged from the hospital. But if the patient doesn't go well, they go again to the lab to request the results. And also, they have an interest at the end of the process, let's say, when they have to do a presentation, they have to take all the data for some publication. So this is the reality. But also, thinking about that, you can see that I mark here that this is the highest priority for them. So when they send the sample, so we have a narrow space just to release the results when they have a lot of interest of that. And we know there are some places that they are highly interested. Of course, I'm not going to talk about the molecular tests or even a gram stain that we can perform, and this is rapid results for bacteriology. I'm talking here about the sepsis patient. And we can see the Kumar figure that you have seen this several times, and they say that if there is a delay in the antimicrobial treatment, it's very important for the patient. And thinking about that, I think, what can we do with that in the laboratory? I don't know what can we do there, because we have to act very quick. Sometimes we can think we can use a molecular test probably, but they are not so efficient. There are very low number of microorganisms. So in the papers that they have for the surveillance sepsis campaign, they say, well, the results for the clinical microbiology laboratory are very important for the management of the antimicrobial therapy once I have started the treatment, for the de-escalation, escalation, or to maintain the treatment, or to change that. So again, we have a window of opportunity. And I want to take this attention to this review from Brigitte Lamy, was published in Clinical Microbiology Infection. It's a very nice review, very short one, but has the highlights that we can do with a bloodstream infection. And she start using a term which is microbiologistic, that we can do obviously in the lab, organizing that, but also put different things that we can do. The Malditov is something that is now standard of care, the using of the immunochromatography, and of course she includes also here the rapid antimicrobial susceptibility testing techniques for doing efforts for the patient that are for a sepsis patient, and to answer the previous question from the sepsis campaign. And going back to the literature, you know, I like this paper, that this is from 1999, that take the idea of the rapid antimicrobial susceptibility testing, the RAS, versus the normal antimicrobial susceptibility testing. This was done with an automatic system. This automatic system can release the results, starting doing that in 8 hours and so on, and before the normal hours, that is 16 to 18 or even 24. And they construct a curve and obtain different results regarding which is the impact of the results for the antimicrobial susceptibility testing. And the results you can see there is the turnaround is obviously that we reduce that with that. Also, they have some differences in the mortality. It is not real impact of them. We have the length of stay, and because the length of the stay is affected, they made a calculation, a rapid calculation, and also they save money. But also in the figure, you can see that using the rapid antimicrobial susceptibility testing, the patients were more adequately treated in the group of the rapid antimicrobial susceptibility testing than in the other one was the normal antimicrobial susceptibility test. We did some study like this. We published 2 years ago, and you can see here that just taking the microorganisms and putting the microorganisms directly in the panels of another antimicrobial susceptibility testing machine, assistant there, we save time. And this has also an importance to the patient. Obviously, we save at least 1 day in the release of the results, and we can also do efforts in the influence or the treatment of the patient of that. And that was also the idea of the RUST with the UCAS, just doing this inoculum directly to the place, and also trying to read these results at 4 hours, 6 hours, and 8 hours. I mark here 6 hours because this is a reasonable time. Sometimes with the 4 hours, not all the antibiotics can read in a very efficient way, but with 6 hours, you obtain the accuracy of the inhibition zones are adequate to that. Here you can see another article, just using this RUST and the influence that may have for the treatment of the patient. They compare a group. This was also a quasi-experimental group. They do with the RUST and compare with another one that was previously done, and they obtain also a reduction in the time to optimal treatment, so they have an impact of that. And again, in mortality, there was not also an influence, but also they had there a less mortality in the group that they were following with the RUST group. And we have also this study that was published by our group recently, just taking advantage not only the interpretation of the inhibition zones, the idea there was the interpretation of the phenotypes, and also to infer which was the resistant mechanism, using exactly the same knowledge of the RUST, of the reading of the disk, but also just going a step more in advance, just using a table for the identification of the different carbapenemases. We can think that this is an intelligent artificial way. We did in a non-artificial way, just introducing the interpretation of the antibiogram, and very recently has been published in Nature Communication exactly the same idea with interpretation of the antibiogram, but using a more sophisticated way for doing that, and they call that artificial intelligent application of that. And reading also in the literature, there was a publication from the group of the Karolinska Institute, also trying to understand what was the importance of releasing the data from the laboratory that was published in Clinical Infectious Disease. And one of the conclusions of the study was that the delay in the appropriate antimicrobial treatment was associated with an increase in the mortality. So if we decrease the reporting time, the rapid antimicrobial susceptibility testing, we are also decreasing the mortality of the patients. So my personal view of the rapid antimicrobial susceptibility testing is that we have a lot of advance. The innovation of the laboratory process, this is crucial. The automation of the process and introduction of artificial intelligence, we can include this type of system to interpret the results. The reduction of the reporting time, this is obviously to active participation of laboratory on the stewardship teams. They are waiting for the results to act to the patients. We influence in the better patient outcomes, and also we decrease a general hospital budget as if we can decrease the length of stay. But we have different challenges. The organization of the rapid antimicrobial susceptibility testing, depending on your organization of the lab. Some labs only open on the mornings, another one morning and the afternoons, another one extended for the 24 hours. The adequate release and communication, this is also crucial. We can do our best, but we have to do also efforts to communicate the results that we are producing. Also, the implication of the stewardship teams, this is also crucial to translate the results to the patients. to adequacy of the cost of the laboratory, because at the very beginning we are going to use more money in the laboratory, but we have to compensate this with the general budget of the hospital, and also it is crucial the implication of the hospital managing team in the implementation of all of these techniques. So thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, we come to our last speaker of this very interesting session so far. This is Astrid Mjoldermann. She's by training a clinical pharmacist and was working for many years at the university hospitals in Brussels, where she was responsible for the implementation of full lab automation, implementing WASP Lab, Colibri, and Radiant. And now she's since 2002 at the St. Jan Hospital, heading the infection control department.
Thank you. I will give you a short background of the rapid AST performed on the Radian. And as you know, the Radian is a WASP Lab module for the automation of the pre-analytical steps, as well as the reading of antibiograms based on disk diffusion. It was installed in June 2021 in the University Hospital of Brussels. And the workflow starts with a 0.5 McFarland suspension, which can be made manually or by Colibri. The suspension is placed on the WASP, and the WASP will inoculate the plate. Then your Müller-Hinton plate goes to the Radian, and the Radian will place the discs one by one on the plate, depending on the protocol you have set up. And it's a real big advantage that the discs are placed one by one, as you can play endlessly by the combination of discs that you place on the plate like that. The plate will be incubated in the WASP Lab system. And at predetermined time points, you get a picture of the inhibition zones with automatic measurement. And finally, you get an interpretation by the expert system where the UCAST rules are already implemented, but you can also add your own rules. Another advantage of the system is that you can set specific breakpoints according to the incubation time. So you can actually automate the rapid AST. And this is an example of the inhibition zones at the different time points. And as you can see, they are clearly visible at the high-resolution pictures. We evaluated the rapid AST performed by Radian by comparing 49 clinical isolates to the standardized disk diffusion method. And as you can see, we observed a very good categorical agreement exceeding 90% for all groups at all time points, except for the Pseudomonas aeruginosa, but there we included only 4 isolates. Important to mention also is that all MRSA, CPE, and ESBL isolates were correctly identified by the rapid AST. So actually, the rapid AST is a very useful tool which can be easily integrated in the routine thanks to automation by the WASP Lab system. And I would like to end this presentation by an interesting case of a pregnant woman who presented at the emergency department with abdominal pain and fever. And the diagnosis of chorioamnionitis was made. So we started with amoxicillin clavulanic acid empirically. But she deteriorated quickly and was transferred to the intensive care unit as she went into a septic shock. And at that moment, the samples taken at admission became positive as well, with E. coli, being a swab of the vagina and the placenta, and 3 pairs of blood cultures. From those blood cultures, we performed a rapid AST with the Radian, and only 4 hours later, we already had the results, showing that the strain was only amikacin and meropenem susceptible. And unfortunately, you don't have specific breakpoints for amoxicillin clavulanic acid with the rapid AST breakpoints. But you do have a screening system for ESBL. And based on ceftazidime, we saw that the strain was ESBL positive. So we changed therapy to meropenem. And the day after, it was also confirmed by the standardized AST that it indeed concerned an ESBL-producing E. coli. So we gained at least 1 day by implementing the rapid AST. And from the moment of antibiotic switch, the patient recovered quickly. She could leave the intensive care unit after 2 days. And 11 days after the admission, she could leave the hospital in good health. So in this case of a young patient without history of hospital admissions, and thus a low suspicion of antibiotic resistance, shows the huge gain in time you can achieve by implementing the rapid AST with an important clinical impact. And with that, I would like to thank you for the attention.
Okay, now we have our panel discussion, and I would like to ask all the speakers on stage. So maybe I start with a question, and please use the microphone. There are also 97 people online, so don't be shy, ask your questions. So my question would actually be, what is the critical size a lab needs to have to go into lab automation? Maybe that's a question for Oliver, yes?
Okay, yeah, because we have the smallest lab in that comparison. It depends on many factors. There's, at least to my experience, there's no real lower limit. So I'm heading a comparatively small laboratory with about 350 samples per day. And we had a pretty good gain when implementing the automation. So at least from my personal experience, 350 samples a day is a size where you can start with automation and can really have a return of investment in terms of time savings.
Okay, thank you very much. Now there's a question up front here.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Lorena Lopez from Sevilla, and it's a comment and a question or something, an idea, why we have to use intelligence only for the lab. What I wonder as clinical microbiologists, as the intelligence connected with the clinical record and prioritize, for example, samples from a sepsis patient, and those samples will be prioritized in my work, in my workflow, and will be the urine, the blood culture, and respiratory samples will be the first, because it's a very vulnerable patient. I think we are focusing only on the lab, and we can use intelligence for many, to improve our workflow. That's my opinion.
Can I say something? I totally agree with you. I think anyway artificial intelligence is not restricted to the lab. We need it in the pre-analytical and post-analytical phase as well. It's just a time for the pre-analytical, I think we need to collaborate with physicians, nurses, with the hospital. We have to do a system integration because maybe our informatics system are not exactly the same. But once we manage to do that, I think we will have a real gain in efficiency and follow-up and traceability of what's going on, from sample collection to the patient to the final results. I don't know what your opinion on that.
Yes, I will add, I absolutely agree with you, Lorena. And we now, thanks to the electronic chart of the patient, we always read things in the lab with a computer that is open just to access to the clinical chart of the patient. So there is a lot of information that we can retrieve to this and to automatically down and to read and to take decision. For instance, in the evaluation of colonization or emergency of some pathogens of resistance in a follow-up. So I absolutely agree with this concept.
So I'd like to ask an additional question. A lot of the discussion today has been around kind of accelerating results, bringing results faster. What are the challenges that you faced bringing those more rapid results to the prescribers, to the clinicians from the lab as the technology advances?
I can start answering that. So sometimes what you have to do is to have the results at the very beginning of the day. So this is something that you have to assure. Even some labs has decided to start working even 1 or 1.5 hours earlier to the normal hours, because this has an advance. When the clinician goes to do runs, if you have the results before, they are going to take a decision. But we have another technologies here. Now we have the mobiles, we have the pop-ups in the computers, so we have to assure, or even the phone calls, the traditional way to do that. So we have to take also these efforts, and this is why one of the conclusions to involve the antimicrobial stewardship, for instance, in these results of the antibiotic susceptibility testing. But we have different tools nowadays.
Okay, are there more questions from the audience?
Thank you. It was a fantastic symposium. I'd like to ask Dr. Simone Ambretti. You mentioned a thorough validation that you performed. Did you do validation on your own plates, or you took pre-validated plates from the manufacturer? And how long was the validation? How long did it take? And you didn't say a word about the colibri. And the reason I'm asking this is maybe you don't use it, or perhaps I saw that your lab closes at 8:00 p.m. or 8:30, and I was just thinking, would the colibri be quick enough to fit into those hours? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. We do not have colibri, maybe in the future. And about the validation, we perform the validation on our own plates. Few weeks for validation of each protocols because of our high numbers, particularly for CRE surveillance protocol and also for urine culture protocols. Our numbers allowed us to have a validation, a quick validation, because we have the possibility to develop the high numbers needed for the validation of these protocols.
So, is there a reason you don't use the colibri?
We do not have we currently do not have a colibri. Maybe the next standard, I don't know.
Oh.
Okay, maybe the next question, yeah?
Hi. Also, thank you very much for all these presentations. I have a question about the susceptibility testing for Dr. Meldermans and Dr. Canton. For Dr. Meldermans, the question is, do you completely rely on the artificial intelligence, or do you do visual checking of the results?
You get a picture of the inhibition zone and the automatic interpretation, which is very useful, and actually most of the time it's correct, but we do check the inhibition zones also visually by ourselves. Certainly, in the beginning of the use of the radian, we always check the inhibition zones, but actually it works very good.
So you do not need to adjust in more than 99% of the
No,
cases?
not at all, no.
Of any of the sounds?
No, actually it's not, most of the times it's correct. It's just that sometimes you have a zone at the breakpoint, and then it's good to have a look yourself, because that's the system doesn't know, but the measurement is quite correct.
And that also accounts for the Müller-Hinton fastidious, for examples, when you have hemolytic streptococci, then you have inhibition zones and hemolysis zones. So
I can read that.
We don't use it. We didn't use it already for the fastidious.
Can I ask a question to?
Yes, certainly, please.
So
I'm waiting.
There is a Cochrane review of randomized trials, and I think it includes 6 trials for rapid AST from blood cultures. And I think it's only 2 phenotypic methods. And the conclusion of that Cochrane review of randomized trials is that there's no advantage of rapid AST from blood cultures on length of stay. What do you think of that in relation to the data you showed?
Well, I will start with the typical answer. Thank you very much for asking me, because I read this Cochrane analysis, fortunately, because I enter in the well, obviously I read the title, I read the summary, and I was, well, there is no impact. The problem, this was published in 2021. The study covered until, I remember, until 2019, something like that. And at the end, they conclude only with six studies. And the problem, that's my personal opinion, that we have now is how can we demonstrate this decrease of the length of stay? When I started my residency, the length of stay was probably 14 days, 12 days, something like that. Now, the length of stay of a patient in a medical ward is in between 5 to 6 days. In surgical, it can be slightly higher, and in intensive care unit, roughly 10 days. So the space to improve that we have now is very short. It's very short. If we want to see the advantage, probably we have to go not to the broad number of patients, because they are going to be diluted, and probably the efforts must be done in the most critical patients, because there we will probably demonstrate more this. We have a presentation a poster here that we present data about that using a rapid antimicrobial susceptibility testing, that we have to go in details in the patients that are more critical. And probably there we can demonstrate that a patient, for instance, that is admitted in an intensive care unit per day costs roughly, depending the country, but it can be in between 2,000 euros and 3,000 euros. So if we multiply this and we, let's say we are going to decrease even 1.5 days of 2 days, if we multiply this for the number of patients at the end of the year, we'll be efficient for that.
I'm very sorry. Our length of stay is also over. I'm very sorry. So I have to conclude the session.
Sorry for this long answer.
It's all good. Maybe we can ask questions later on. I just want to thank all the speakers for this deep dive into different aspects of lab automation, covering workflows, rapid AST, MALDI-TOF. All these technologies generate a lot of data. This is really exciting. And I just want to quote here Anthony Croxato, who said, the Colibri never gets tired, so doesn't the AI. And I hope that you will have a very nice rest of the ECCMID. Thank you very much.